Have you ever dealt with someone so convinced of their own importance that reality itself seems like a minor inconvenience to them? I'm talking about a level of arrogance so profound that facts, laws, and even property deeds are treated as mere suggestions. I bought my house for one reason above all others: tranquility. It's a modest, comfortable place, but it backs onto a sliver of paradise. My property line extends down a gentle slope, through a stand of old-growth oak trees, ending at a small private stretch of shoreline on a crystal-clear lake. It's not a massive estate, just a long, narrow lot that happens to include this beautiful, secluded footpath. My name is Alex, and by trade, I'm a cartographer and geographic information systems analyst. That means I spend my days working with complex maps, satellite imagery, and legal property data. It's a job that requires precision, patience, and an almost fanatical devotion to detail. I never, in a million years, thought I'd have to deploy the full force of my professional skill set to defend my own backyard from the person who was supposed to be upholding community standards. The trouble began when Carol Beaumont moved into the sprawling McMansion at the head of our cul-de-sac. Within 2 months, she had leveraged her husband's money and her own overbearing personality to become the new president of our sleepy Homeowners Association. Her platform was simple: elevate the neighborhood's prestige. This apparently meant a lot of new, pointless rules and a sharp increase in busybody behavior. The inciting incident, the one that kicked this whole mess off, was an email. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, its subject line, a bold-faced declaration: mandatory planning meeting for the annual summer gala. I learned that Carol had decided the HOA's annual potluck was too common. She was rebranding it as an exclusive gala, complete with caterers and a string quartet. The email contained a PDF attachment, a crude map of the neighborhood with a thick red line drawn on it. The line started at the cul-de-sac, ran straight down the footpath on my property, and ended at my little piece of lakeshore, where she had drawn a star and labeled it Champagne Point. She was, without my knowledge or consent, planning to use my private path and lakefront as the main attraction for her high society party. She was treating my land, my quiet retreat, as an event venue she had the right to command. What Carol Beaumont didn't know was that while she was busy playing Queen of the Cul-de-sac with a pirated copy of some design software, I had access to terabytes of geospatial data and the professional expertise to turn it into an inescapable legal cage. She thought she was dealing with a quiet, nerdy guy who kept to himself. She was about to find out what happens when you try to redraw the map on a mapmaker. Have you ever had to stand your ground against someone who simply refuses to hear the word no? This entire story is a testament to the fact that the most arrogant people often have the most fragile foundations. It's a long and detailed account, but I promise you, the payoff is worth every single word. My first response was, I believe, a model of polite restraint. I found Carol's email address in the HOA directory and composed a message that was firm but neighborly. I congratulated her on her ambition for the gala, and then gently pointed out the factual error in her plan. Carol, I wrote, I think there's been a small misunderstanding. The path you've marked on the map as the Lakeside Promenade is actually part of my private property, as defined by my deed in the official county plat maps. While it's a beautiful spot, it is not a common area, and I'm afraid it won't be available for the gala. I wish you the best of luck with the event. I hit send, naively believing that would be the end of it. A simple correction of a simple error. Her reply came less than 5 minutes later, a digital slap in the face. Alex, it began with a tone of condescending patience that I could feel through the screen. I appreciate you reaching out, but the prestige of our community requires us all to be a little more flexible. The path provides essential lake access and is considered a community asset for important events. We'll have it professionally lit and decorated. Your cooperation is expected. My jaw tightened. Community asset? Expected? I took a deep breath and walked over to my filing cabinet, pulling out the thick folder from my home purchase. There it was. The survey, the title report, the deed. The lines were as clear as day. My property was an L-shaped parcel, and that path was unequivocally mine. I decided a face-to-face conversation was in order. Perhaps email was too impersonal. Later that day, I walked up the street to her palatial home. She answered the door holding a tiny, yapping dog, looking at me as if I were a particularly uninteresting insect that had wandered onto her marble doorstep. "Yes," she said, not inviting me in. I tried again. "Hi, Carol. Alex from down the street. I just wanted to talk in person about the Gala path. I think there's some bad information floating around. I have my official survey right here if you'd like to see it. The path is definitely on my land." She didn't even glance at the papers I held out. She shifted the dog in her arms and gave me a thin, patronizing smile. "We're not going to get bogged down in paperwork, Alex. A community is about sharing. It's about a feeling. You should be proud to contribute to the beautification and success of our neighborhood. It increases everyone's property values." I was stunned by the sheer gall of her logic. She was literally telling me that my legal ownership of my own land was less important than her feeling about community. "Carol," I said, my voice losing its neighborly warmth, "this isn't about feelings. It's a matter of law and liability. I am not sharing my private property for a party. It's not happening." Her smile vanished. Her face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "You will find, Alex," she said, her voice dropping to a low, menacing tone, "that this HOA has bylaws to deal with uncooperative residents. You are obstructing a community right-of-way. You will receive a formal notice. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important calls to make." And with that, she shut the door in my face. True to her word, the formal notice arrived 2 days later. It was an impressive piece of pseudo-legal nonsense, printed on thick letterhead with the HOA logo. It cited a non-existent bylaw about aesthetic easements and accused me of community resource hoarding. It imposed a fine of $100 per day until I restored access to the lakeside promenade. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a declaration of war. She was manufacturing laws and fines out of thin air, banking on the idea that I would be too intimidated or too weary to fight back. That was her second and far more serious mistake. She had no idea who she was picking a fight with. She saw me as an obstacle. I was about to become her judge, jury, and cartographer. The final straw, the moment that transformed my frustration into cold, calculated determination, came a week later. I was in my home office, which overlooks the backyard and the path in question, when I saw movement. 2 teenagers, armed with hedge trimmers and a shovel, were standing at the top of my footpath. They were tentatively looking back towards the street, then down at my carefully cultivated garden of native ferns and wildflowers that bordered the entrance to the trail. My blood ran cold. I slid open my office window and yelled, "Excuse me, you're on private property. What are you doing?" One of the kids, startled, dropped his shovel. The other, bolder one, shouted back, "Ms. Beaumont sent us. She said to clear this brush for the new promenade." "Brush?" He was calling my garden brush. I saw red. I stormed out of my house and down the lawn. "This isn't brush. It's my garden. And this isn't a promenade. It's my yard. Ms. Beaumont has absolutely no authority to send anyone onto my land. I need you to leave. Now." They looked at each other, confused. Clearly just kids trying to make a few bucks. Thankfully, they weren't looking for a fight. They gathered their tools and shuffled off, mumbling apologies. I stood there, heart pounding with adrenaline and fury, staring at the small patch of ferns one of them had already started to hack at. This was it. She had escalated from bureaucratic bullying to active physical trespassing and property damage. The time for polite emails and conversations was over. She had crossed a legal line, and I was going to bury her under an avalanche of data she couldn't possibly comprehend. That evening, I didn't watch TV. I didn't read a book. I went into my office, closed the door, and fired up my workstation. To a normal person, it looks like an over-the-top gaming setup. 3 large, high-resolution monitors, a powerful processing tower humming quietly on the floor. But this wasn't for play. This was for work. I launched the software that is the core of my professional life. A suite of advanced geographic information system programs. This software doesn't just show you a map, it allows you to build a map, layer by layer, with any data you can feed it. I started with the basics. I accessed the county's digital parcel database and downloaded the official shapefile for my subdivision. On the center monitor, a clean, precise outline of all the neighborhood lots appeared. I clicked on my parcel. A box of data popped up: owner name, assessed value, and, most importantly, the unique parcel identifier number. This number was my key. With it, I could unlock decades of history. I opened another program and began querying the county recorder's online archives. I wasn't just looking for my own deed. I was pulling the entire chain of title, going all the way back to the original developer who first carved this land out of a farm field in the 1970s. I downloaded every deed, every easement, every covenant, every plat map associated with that original development. Documents materialized on my screen as PDFs and high-resolution TIFF images, some crisp and modern, others faded scans of typewritten pages from half a century ago. This was my world. While Carol Beaumont was planning her canapés and floral arrangements, I was building a fortress of facts, brick by digital brick. This wasn't about a simple argument anymore. This was about creating a presentation of evidence so complete, so irrefutable, that her entire argument would collapse into dust under its own weight. I wasn't just going to prove I was right. I was going to prove she was so profoundly and recklessly wrong that she would never dare to bother me or anyone else in this neighborhood ever again. For the next few nights, my office became a command center. The glow of my monitors was the only light on in the house until the early hours of the morning. To an outsider, what I was doing would seem tedious, but to me, it was a thrilling hunt. I was an archaeologist digging through digital strata, searching for the bones of a legal truth. Carol was operating on assumption, on what she felt should be true. I was operating on what was true, and I was going to prove it with geographic precision. The first step was to georeference the old plat maps. This is a process where I take a static image, like a scanned map from 1972, and digitally pin it to real-world coordinates. I found the original surveyor's monuments on the old map, small brass caps, set in concrete at key corners of the subdivision, and matched them to their known GPS coordinates in my modern database. With a few clicks, the old faded map warped slightly and then snapped perfectly into place over the modern satellite view, like a ghost aligning with its body. Now I could toggle between the past and the present, seeing how the developer's original lines corresponded with the houses and roads of today. And on every single map, from the first proposal to the final recorded plat, the line was the same. The path was an integral part of my lot, Lot 14. There was no ambiguity. But I knew that wouldn't be enough for Carol. She had used the word easement. An easement is a legal right for someone to use another person's land for a specific purpose. It's a powerful and often misunderstood concept. A lazy person might see the word easement on a map and assume it means public access. Carol was a lazy person. I had to find what she was clinging to and dismantle it. So I started searching the text of every recorded document for the word easement. Bingo. I found it, buried in a dense, 9-page document titled Declaration of Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions for Lakeside Meadows Subdivision. There it was, in Article 4. Section 3. A 20-foot wide utility and drainage easement running along the eastern edge of Lots 12, 13, and my Lot 14. My heart skipped a beat for a second. Could she be right? Was there some forgotten clause? I read the paragraph carefully. Then I read it again. A slow grin spread across my face. The easement was explicitly and exclusively for the installation and maintenance of underground utilities, including but not limited to water, sewer, and electrical conduits, and for the conveyance of surface water drainage. It said nothing about pedestrian access, nothing about promenades or champagne points. It was a utility corridor, meant to be underground and out of sight. That was good, but it got better. The very next section, Section 4, was titled Contingent Development. It described the developer's original, grand vision to build a community clubhouse and marina on a large parcel of land adjacent to the subdivision. Section 4 stated that the utility easement in Section 3 was granted contingent upon the construction of this clubhouse, which would have needed those utility hookups. I already knew, just from living here, that there was no clubhouse, just a patch of undeveloped woods. A quick cross-reference with the county tax records confirmed it. The land was still zoned as vacant, owned by a defunct development corporation. The clubhouse was never built, therefore the legal condition for the easement's existence was never met. The easement wasn't just for the wrong purpose, it was legally void. She had built her entire campaign of harassment on a ghost. She'd found a word on a map and invented a reality around it. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the data on my screens illuminating a feeling of pure, unadulterated triumph. I had her, but I wasn't done. The best defense, after all, is a good offense. If she wanted to play a game of scrutinizing property rights, I was going to play it better than she could have ever imagined. The discovery of the voided utility easement was the moment the tide turned. I went from being a defendant to being a hunter. I had the facts to dismantle her case against me, but that would only result in a stalemate. It would stop her aggression, but it wouldn't address the core of the problem, her baseless arrogance and abuse of power. I wanted to do more than just win. I wanted to establish a new precedent of accountability for the HOA and for its tin-pot dictator president. A thought sparked in my mind, fueled by righteous indignation and a bit of professional curiosity. If she was this sloppy and arrogant about my property, what about her own? Carol Beaumont, in her quest for prestige, had made numerous improvements to her own lot since moving in. The most prominent was a large, white, vaguely Greco-Roman gazebo she had constructed in her backyard, a structure she frequently used for hosting small, exclusive social gatherings. It was her personal throne room. I decided to give Lot 1, the Beaumont estate, the same fine-tooth comb treatment I had given my own. I pulled up its parcel data, its chain of title, its entire recorded history. I layered the old maps over the new ones, scanned the covenants, and cross-referenced everything with the county's public works database. For a few hours, I found nothing but standard agreements and utility easements common to all lots. I was beginning to think her property was clean, but then I saw it. It wasn't on the original subdivision plat from the 70s. It was in a separate document, filed with the county in 1988, titled Public Access Easement Dedication. My eyes widened. I read the legal description of the easement's path, a 15-foot wide strip. I quickly plotted the coordinates in my GIS software. A bright red line slashed across my screen. It ran from the public road, along the entire northern edge of Carol's property, cutting straight through her manicured lawn and intersecting with the back corner of her lot, which bordered a small, wooded area that was designated county parkland. The purpose of the easement was explicitly stated: to provide permanent and unrestricted access for County Parks Department personnel and light machinery for the purpose of trail maintenance, fire mitigation, and ecological management. This wasn't a defunct contingent easement for buried pipes. This was a live, dedicated public access right-of-way granted to the county government itself. Out of curiosity, I switched to the most recent high-resolution aerial photograph of the neighborhood, taken just 3 months ago. I zoomed in on Carol's property, and there it was. A 6-foot-tall wrought iron fence ran along the front of her property, with a large, imposing gate. And right where the public access easement began, she had bolted a heavy-duty lock and a professionally made sign. The sign read, "Private property. No trespassing. Monitored by 24-hour surveillance." This was the aha moment, the checkmate I hadn't even known I was looking for. The woman who was harassing me, fining me, and sending people onto my land based on a phantom community right-of-way was herself, actively and illegally obstructing a legitimate, recorded public access route intended for government use. Her hypocrisy was breathtaking. The plan began to form in my mind, elegant in its simplicity. I would not confront her. I would not send her an angry email. I would let her continue down her path of self-importance. I would let her schedule her gala, print her invitations, and call her big HOA meeting to publicly shame me. I would walk into that meeting, into the lion's den she had prepared for me, and I would calmly and methodically skin the lion alive with her own hypocrisy, using nothing but facts, maps, and the law. I contacted an old college friend, Mark, who was now a real estate attorney. I sent him a secure digital package with all the documents and a summary of my findings. His reply came an hour later. "Alex, this is beautiful. Not only is her claim against you completely baseless, but your counterclaim is an ironclad slam dunk. Her obstruction of the county easement is a clear violation of state law. The county would have a field day with this. Let me know when you want to lower the boom. This is going to be fun." Fun. Yes, that was exactly the right word for it. The next phase of my operation was one of strategic patience. It required me to absorb Carol's escalating provocations while quietly sharpening the blade she couldn't see coming. My first move was to craft a formal, registered letter. I didn't use my lawyer friend Mark's letterhead. I wanted this to come from me, to reinforce the image of a reasonable resident pushed to his limit. The letter was a masterpiece of calm, factual rebuttal. In 3 short paragraphs, I stated that her claim of a lakeside promenade was factually incorrect. I cited the specific book and page number of my deed in the county records. I explained that the utility easement she was likely confused about was both for the wrong purpose and legally void, citing the specific clauses in the original covenants. I formally demanded that she and any agents of the HOA cease and desist from trespassing on my property, Lot 14, and stated that any further entry would be documented and reported to the authorities. I also included a professionally prepared bill for the damages to my garden, complete with photos and quotes from a local nursery to replace the native plants her landscapers had destroyed. I sent the letter via certified mail with a return receipt requested. The little green card came back a few days later, bearing Carol Beaumont's arrogant, flourishing signature. I knew she wouldn't take it seriously. To a bully like her, a letter like that isn't a warning. It's a sign that you're resorting to paperwork, which she sees as a weakness. It was precisely the reaction I was counting on. My next step was documentation. I purchased and installed 2 small, discreet, high-definition security cameras. They were weatherproof and motion-activated. One was positioned with a clear view of the entrance to my footpath. The other was mounted higher up, under the eaves of my house, providing a wider angle view of my entire backyard and the property line. They fed a continuous, time-stamped video stream to a secure server I set up in my office. From that moment on, every step anyone took onto my land would be recorded. Meanwhile, Carol's behavior grew more audacious. She was clearly emboldened by what she perceived as my feeble written-word resistance. I heard from a sympathetic neighbor, Mrs. Gable from across the street, that Carol had been openly mocking me at her little pre-gala planning committee meetings. She'd apparently waved my letter around and called it a desperate, pathetic little love note from our resident hermit. She assured her committee members that she was handling me, and that the legal technicalities were being sorted out by the HOA's lawyer. Lawyer I was fairly certain didn't exist, or was, at best, her husband's corporate tax attorney, who wouldn't know a property easement from a lease agreement. She began talking about the Beaumont Promenade, as if it were an established fact, a generous gift she was bestowing upon the community. She was building a narrative with herself as the heroic visionary and me as the selfish villain. She was so blinded by her own ego, so certain of her dominance, that she couldn't see the hole she was digging for herself. Every boastful statement, every dismissive comment reported back to me, was another nail she was hammering into her own coffin. I simply continued to gather my data, refine my presentation, and wait. The trap was set. The bait me apparent passivity was laid out. All I had to do was wait for the queen to swagger into her own checkmate. The waiting was the hardest part, but I knew, with the certainty of a surveyor looking at a brass marker, that it would be worth it. The invitation arrived, as expected, via a neighborhood-wide email blast. It was for a special HOA general meeting scheduled for the Thursday evening before her Saturday gala. The email was cloaked in the language of administrative procedure, but the agenda told the real story. Tucked between approval of previous meetings minutes and new business was the centerpiece item, Agenda Item 3. Resolution for censure of resident at Lot 14 for bylaw noncompliance and formal dedication of the Lakeview Promenade. She wasn't just planning to announce her victory. She was planning to publicly humiliate me first. It was perfect. This was the stage I needed. A public forum, on her terms, where the entire community would be present to witness her downfall. I clicked accept on the calendar invitation and smiled. The final days leading up to the meeting were spent in meticulous preparation. This wasn't just about having the right information. It was about presenting it in a way that was so clear, so visually compelling, that no one in that room could misinterpret it. I finalized my GIS presentation. It wasn't a series of static slides. It was a dynamic, interactive map that I could control from my laptop. I created different visual layers that I could toggle on and off: the base satellite imagery, the official county parcel lines, the text of the deeds, the path of the voided utility easement highlighted in ominous yellow, and, of course, the path of the active public access easement on her property highlighted in a damning, brilliant red. I embedded high-resolution scans of the key legal documents directly into the presentation. I could zoom in on the exact wording of the easements, the developer's original covenants, and the public access dedication from 1988. I also prepared a folder containing the time-stamped video clips from my security cameras. One clip clearly showed the teenagers with the hedge trimmers arriving and admitting Carol had sent them. Another clip from just 2 days prior showed Carol herself, bold as brass, walking 10 feet down my path, pointing and talking to a man who appeared to be a caterer, planning the logistics for her party on my land. It was irrefutable proof of her continued trespassing, even after receiving my cease and desist letter. My lawyer friend, Mark, reviewed the final package. "This is overkill in the best possible way, Alex," he'd said over the phone. "You're not bringing a knife to a gunfight. You're bringing a targeted satellite strike. Just stay calm. Let her talk. Let her hang herself with her own words. Then, just present the facts. Don't get emotional. Be the boring, precise cartographer. It will make the impact that much more devastating." On the evening of the meeting, I put on a simple collared shirt and slacks. I packed my laptop, a compact high-definition projector, and a small portfolio. Inside the portfolio were 3 printed documents: a copy of the cease and desist letter she had ignored, a final, itemized bill for the garden damages plus the cost of the security cameras, and a pristine, notarized copy of the formal complaint against her that I had filed with the county's code enforcement and public works departments that very afternoon. I was calm. The frustration and anger that had fueled me for weeks had cooled and hardened into a quiet, diamond-sharp confidence. I wasn't going to a fight. I was going to a reckoning. I was going to restore order to my corner of the world using the very tools she had dismissed as paperwork. As I walked out my front door and up the street toward the community clubhouse where the meeting was being held, I felt a sense of profound clarity. She thought this was her show. She had no idea she was merely the opening act for mine. The community clubhouse was buzzing with a low murmur of anticipation. About 40 residents were seated in folding chairs, sipping complimentary bottled water. At the front of the room, Carol Beaumont sat at a long table, flanked by a nervous-looking HOA treasurer and a secretary who was frantically trying to get the meeting minutes in order. Carol herself looked radiant and smug, dressed in a sharp blazer, the very picture of confident authority. She spotted me as I entered and gave me a tight, triumphant little smile, the kind a cat gives a cornered mouse. I ignored her, found a seat near the back, and quietly set up my laptop and projector, pointing the lens toward the blank white wall at the front of the room. A few people glanced at my setup with curiosity, but Carol paid it no mind, likely assuming it was for some boring treasurer's report. The meeting began with tedious formalities. The minutes were approved. The treasurer gave a bewildering report on the budget for mulch, and then Carol cleared her throat, tapping the microphone for effect. "And now," she announced, her voice resonating with theatrical gravity, "we move to Agenda Item 3. She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "As you all know, I have been working tirelessly to prepare for our first annual Lakeside Gala, an event designed to elevate our community and, frankly, our property values. A smattering of polite applause. A key feature of this elegant evening is the Beaumont Promenade," she continued, somehow managing to name the path after herself with a straight face. "It provides a breathtaking walk down to Champagne Point on the lake. Regrettably, one of our residents, Mr. Alex Sterling of Lot 14, has refused to cooperate. He has engaged in what can only be described as community resource hoarding, denying access to a path that has, by tradition and necessity, been a community asset. She looked directly at me. He has ignored neighborly requests and even formal HOA notices. Therefore, I move that the HOA officially censure Mr. Sterling for his non-compliance with community standards. And I further move that we formally dedicate the path as a permanent HOA right-of-way for all future community events. Do I have a second? A hand shot up from the front row, one of her known cronies. All in favor? A sea of hands went up, perhaps half the room, mostly people who were either her friends or simply didn't want to cross her. Any opposed? A few hesitant hands, including my own and my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, went up. Carol dismissed us with a wave. "The motion carries," she declared, a final victorious smirk on her face. "The promenade is officially open." She was about to move on when I stood up. "Madam President," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the room. "Before you move on, I believe I am entitled to speak on the matter for which I was just censured. And I have a short presentation that will clarify some of the legal technicalities for the community." Carol was visibly annoyed, her victory lap interrupted. "Alex, the matter is closed. The vote has passed." "With all due respect," I said, my voice unwavering. "The vote was based on false information you provided. I request 5 minutes to present the correct information to my neighbors." "Surely, in the interest of transparency, you wouldn't deny that." A murmur went through the crowd. She was trapped. Denying me the right to speak now would look tyrannical. "Fine," she snapped, gesturing impatiently at the wall. 5 minutes. "Make it quick." I nodded, turned on my projector, and the brilliant, high-resolution satellite image of our neighborhood flooded the wall. A hush fell over the room. "Thank you," I began. "For those of you who don't know, my profession is in cartography and geospatial analysis. I deal in maps and legal land data. Ms. Beaumont has based her entire argument, and the vote we just took, on the idea that this path on my property is a community asset. Let's look at the actual facts." I toggled a layer. Bright color-coded property lines appeared, perfectly overlaid on the satellite image. This is the official parcel map from the county. As you can see, the path is located entirely within the boundaries of Lot 14, which belongs to me. There is no ambiguity. I then zoomed in on the path and flashed a copy of my deed on the screen. This is my deed. Again, the boundaries are clear. I then toggled another layer, a yellow line tracing the path. Now, I believe Ms. Beaumont's confusion stems from this: a voided utility easement from 1972. I brought up the scan of the original covenant, highlighting the text. As you can all read, this easement was exclusively for underground utilities, not people, and more importantly, its existence was contingent on the construction of a community clubhouse that was never built. Therefore, legally, this easement does not exist. The basis for the censure vote is, with all due respect, a complete fiction. The room was dead silent. People were leaning forward, staring at the screen, then at Carol. Her confident smirk had been replaced by a pale, tight-lipped glare. Her foundation of lies had just been vaporized in a blast of digital proof, but I was just getting started. The silence in the room was thick enough to be measured in atmospheres. The residents were no longer looking at me like a troublemaker. They were looking at Carol with dawning expressions of confusion and doubt. Her face was a frozen mask of fury, her eyes boring into me as I stood calmly by my projector. "So, to summarize the situation regarding my property," I continued, my voice maintaining its steady, almost professorial tone, "there is no community right-of-way. There is no aesthetic easement. The HOA has absolutely no legal authority over my path. The censure vote you just took was based on misinformation, and any attempt by anyone to use that path for the gala will be considered criminal trespassing. I have video evidence of Ms. Beaumont and her agents already trespassing on multiple occasions after receiving a formal cease and desist letter." I let that hang in the air for a moment. You could feel the power in the room shifting, flowing away from the head table and toward the back where I stood. "But," I said, adopting a new, more serious tone, Since we are on the topic of property rights and community responsibilities, I felt it was my duty as a neighbor to conduct a thorough review of all relevant easements in our subdivision. And I found something I think everyone here needs to be aware of. With a click of my mouse, the map on the wall shifted. It zoomed out from my property and then flew across the cul-de-sac, zeroing in with dramatic flair on the sprawling lot and McMansion belonging to Carol Beaumont. I toggled a new layer. A thick, unmistakable red line appeared, slicing directly through her pristine front lawn and running straight through the corner of her prized white gazebo. A collective gasp went through the room. "What is this?" Carol stammered, finally finding her voice. It was no longer commanding. It was shrill with panic. "This is my property! You have no right!" "On the contrary, Mrs. Beaumont," I said, turning to face her directly for the first time. "This red line represents a 15-foot wide public access easement, dedicated to the county in 1988 for the explicit purpose of allowing parks, department crews, and machinery access to the county land behind your lot." I flashed the signed, recorded easement document on the screen, its legal language stark and undeniable. This is not a voided 50-year-old utility clause. This is a live, legally binding public right-of-way, and for the past year, you have been illegally obstructing it. I clicked again. A series of high-resolution time-stamped photos appeared on the screen. The first showed her wrought iron fence and the heavy lock on the gate, right where the easement began. The second was a close-up of the menacing "No Trespassing" sign she had posted. The third was an aerial shot showing the easement's path leading directly to the overgrown trailhead on the county park side, which was clearly being neglected because crews couldn't get to it. The room erupted in murmurs. The hypocrisy was too blatant, too stunning to ignore. The woman who had just tried to publicly censure me for protecting my own property was, herself, committing a far more serious violation. "So while you were drafting illegal fines and harassing my family," I said, my voice now cold as steel, "you were actively breaking the law. While you were accusing me of hoarding a community asset, you were blocking access for the actual county government." I turned off the projector, and the sudden return to the room's normal lighting felt harsh and exposing. I walked to the front table and placed the 3 documents from my portfolio directly in front of a stunned and ashen-faced Carol. "This is a final bill for the damages you caused to my property. This is a copy of the cease and desist letter you ignored. And this," I said, tapping the final document, "is a copy of the formal complaint I filed against you this afternoon with the County Public Works Department and Code Enforcement. I believe they will be in contact with you shortly to discuss the fines for obstruction and the mandatory removal of your fence. Have a wonderful gala." I turned and walked out of the silent, astounded room, leaving Carol Beaumont to drown in the ruin she had built for herself. The aftermath of that meeting was swift and glorious. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, called me less than an hour later, barely able to contain her glee as she recounted the scene after I left. Apparently, the moment the door closed behind me, the room had descended into chaos. Residents started shouting questions at Carol, who was utterly incapable of forming a coherent response. She just sat there, shuffling the papers I'd left her, her face pale white. Her cronies tried to defend her, but with the visual evidence of my presentation burned into everyone's minds, it was useless. The motion to censure me was rescinded on the spot. A new motion was put forward by one of the residents I didn't even know, a vote of no confidence in Carol Beaumont as HOA president. It passed with a nearly unanimous majority. She was stripped of her title and her power right there in the room she had intended as her stage for triumph. Her gala, of course, was an absolute disaster. Without the Beaumont Promenade and Champagne Point as its centerpiece, it was just a sad, overly expensive party in her own backyard. The caterers had to haul their equipment around the long way, and the string quartet was apparently set up awkwardly next to her prize-winning rose bushes. The news of her public humiliation and the reasons for it had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Mrs. Gable told me that only a handful of her closest friends even showed up. The ultimate schadenfreude, however, came the following Tuesday. A large, official-looking county public works truck pulled up in front of Carol's mansion. 2 county employees, armed with bolt cutters and paperwork, presented a visibly distraught Carol with a work order. They summarily cut the lock on her gate and swung it wide open. They then posted a new sign, a standard county one, that read, "Public easement, access for official personnel, do not obstruct. Penalty, $500. Over the next few weeks, Carol was forced to hire a contractor at her own expense to remove a section of her prized wrought iron fence to create a permanent, unobstructed 15-foot gateway. The county also hit her with a significant fine for the years of obstruction. The best part? The County Parks Department, now with full access, began a long overdue fire mitigation project in the woods behind her house. Nearly every other day, a small crew of workers would trudge past her gazebo, sometimes with loud equipment like chainsaws and wood chippers, turning her tranquil backyard oasis into a noisy worksite. The poetic justice was just exquisite. A week after the meeting, a check arrived in my mailbox for the full amount of the damages to my garden, with a terse, unsigned note of apology from the HOA board. The board itself was completely reformed. A group of reasonable, long-time residents took over, led by a retired engineer who immediately moved to have the HOA's bylaws professionally reviewed and clarified to prevent any future abuses of power. The very first act of the new board was to issue a formal public apology to me in the community newsletter. My peace was restored. The path to the lake remained my private sanctuary. I could once again enjoy my morning coffee on my little stretch of shore, undisturbed. I had learned a valuable lesson. When confronted by a bully, you don't sink to their level. You don't trade insults or engage in petty squabbles. Instead, you rise above them. You use logic. You use facts, and if you have it, you use your own unique, specialized knowledge to beat them at their own game. Bullies like Carol Beaumont build their power on a foundation of bluster, intimidation, and the assumption that others won't do the work to check the facts. Their greatest weakness is the truth. My final message to anyone reading this is simple. Know your rights. Do your homework. Don't ever let someone with a big ego and a loud voice convince you that their desires override your reality. True power doesn't come from being the loudest person in the room. It comes from being the best prepared. And trust me, the satisfaction of watching a tyrant get buried under an avalanche of their own hypocrisy is a feeling you will never forget. So, what's the most ridiculous rule you've ever had to deal with from an HOA or a similar authority? Let me know in the comments below.